I've had one of my most profound experiences from the spiritual and mindfulness practices that I partake in just a few weeks ago. And it was during a very specific meditation that I've done, which focuses on creating coherence between your heart and your brain. It's by this person called Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've actually talked about it in one of my videos about that meditation and what happened. But I want to break it down a little bit further to actually talk about that coherence part for your heart and for your brain. What it is exactly, and I want to make it into two separate videos, one for the heart coherence, one for the brain coherence. And this one is going to be about the heart coherence. And I feel like there's an important element that comes into play, especially with creating coherence in your heart, that requires one more element for us to be able to do that properly and fully, which I have been avoiding my whole life, pretty much. I think it's very, very important. So what it is that I want to talk about in terms of creating heart coherence is essentially integrating your emotions into your practice of spirituality and mindfulness. Now, in the meditation, there's not many references to actually say that in order to be able to fully experience what this meditation entails, you have to be able to feel, right? It doesn't say that you have to be able to feel. You do require to feel, though. And I feel like that's where a lot of people would not gain as much as they could from that type of meditation. Because if somebody does not have the intelligence to be able to feel properly, to be able to express emotions properly, they will struggle to do what is necessary in the meditation appropriately. And I personally feel I would have struggled a lot unless I didn't start, if I never started the emotional integration work, the shadow work. I don't think I would have benefited from that meditation as much as I did. So what we do when we try to create coherence in our hearts, we want to essentially take our awareness away from our body as a whole, our environment as a whole, and we try and become nothingness. Now, the reason why we try and become nothingness is because if you look deep into everything objective, everything that we experience in this object-based reality, everything can be traced back to a start, a beginning. Everything that is materialized from an infinitely dense point, which is widely known as the Big Bang, the singularity that became everything, where our reality as we know it came into existence. That's as far as we know. There's also theories like the multiverse and the stuff like different parallel dimensions that are completely different to your own experience of reality based on the actions that we take. It kind of like splits into different realities. If I blink now or blink later, that's going to create an alternative future, alternative timeline that's going to result into a different... There's many things, right? But as far as we know, as far as we can experience, there's only this one reality that we experience, and everything came from this reality. Everything in this reality came from this infinitely dense point, a singularity, if you want to call it that way. So if you look at things from that perspective, everything came from nothing. Everything came from something that is immeasurably small and dense. So you could technically say that everything is nothing. Another way you can look at that is that because everything came from one place, from one point, from one thing, everything is one thing, literally. We just categorize it all by giving scientific names, scientific explanations, theories, maths, all that kind of stuff. All of that is concepts. But one undeniable truth is that if you want to look at it that way, everything came from one thing. So that is the reason why we want to try and become nothing before we can start creating the coherence in our heart. Because if we become nothing, if we become part of that nothingness, the all-enveloping nothingness, then we become authentic. We go into a place with no concepts, no artificialness. We just become fully ourselves. We go back to our source. We become the nothingness that we want to be able to create that coherence in our heart. And that coherence in our heart is essentially a magnetic field that we create. A magnetic field that attracts. And in order to attract what it is that we want to attract, and essentially what we're trying to do with that meditation is by creating coherence between your heart and your brain, we reach out to the quantum field through the frequency that we create in our heart to be able to attract the possibility of a future emotional state that we want to be in at some point in our lives. And that is where the emotional intelligence work comes in. That's where we want to be able to understand our emotions, understand why we have things like low self-worth, why we feel angry, why we feel stuff like grief, why we feel happy, why we suddenly have this sense of peace or contentment, why we struggle in terms of our image of ourselves, why we have to appear in a certain way to others, all these things like perfectionism, everything that you struggle to understand and see very superficially, we need to understand quite deeply and quite in depth to be able to truly sense the emotions and the feelings that we want to be in the future that we desire for ourselves. In order to fully gain from that meditation, in order to fully connect to a future self, a future emotional self of you, you need to become nothing. You need to go back to the source of where you came from, which is everything and nothing at the same time. When you become that nothingness, space opens up within your heart to accept those feelings and emotions from the future. Because when you become nothingness and there are no concepts within you, when you have that space to let in authenticity and let in the feelings and surrender to them, you'll be able to connect to those emotions and feelings from the future. And that is something that happened to me. It's very important to actually be able to feel those emotions and feelings that you want to experience in the future. And you can have the emotional intelligence and understanding of your shadows, of the feelings that you feel, of the emotions that you experience. But there's also an element of surrender. And if you know those shadows of yours, if you know those feelings that you experience that perhaps are uncomfortable to some degree, or even unfamiliar, unless you understand them, you won't be able to surrender to them because they will be uncomfortable. They will feel like they're foreign. They will feel like they're there to hurt you or distract you in some sort of a way. And unfortunately, that is something that we don't really notice or realize when we go through our spirituality journeys. And that is exactly the reason why terms like spiritual bypassing exist. And I've been a victim to spiritual bypassing by my own choice, because I was always thinking if I just align my energy to the correct frequency, I will get the abundance that I want. And that perception got quickly shattered by creating that coherence in my heart, by doing the shadow work, by creating emotional intelligence. Because when I had a small glimpse of the emotional possibility of my future self, where I am content, I am at peace, and I have immense gratitude, I've realized that just a sliver of what is possible is already extremely overwhelming, because my intelligence, my understanding of my emotions and feelings is not equipped yet to fully and truly accept that abundance that I will receive from the future in terms of contentment, peace, and gratitude. It was an extremely overwhelming situation where I couldn't control my emotions. And in fact, I didn't even want to control my emotions, because that was an example of surrender of what I felt in the moment, an overwhelming sense of being proud of myself, of loving myself, of loving what I'm doing and the journey that I'm on and the experiences that I'm experiencing the whole way through to that peace, contentment, and gratitude that I'm going towards. That work, that shadow work that I've done to understand why I have low self-worth, why I cannot accept myself, why I'm such a perfectionist, why I find love difficult, why I find receiving comments difficult, appreciation, and all that kind of stuff, why I rely on being so masculine in terms of the way I perceive life. If I wouldn't have done all that work, I wouldn't have experienced what I have experienced. And I wouldn't have created that tether between me and my future self, which is feeding me with little glimpses of contentment, peace, and gratitude. And it will keep feeding me up until I get to that point that I have been tethered to. And it's a very difficult feeling to explain unless you experience it yourself through difficult work, through difficult healing work, which is that emotional integration, understanding your emotions, your difficult emotions especially, why you feel a certain way, why even sometimes good emotions, why you feel happy about negative situations. Could be things like that as well. There's so many things that we need to work on that we don't even realize because we look at everything so superficially. So we need to be able to deeply reflect, to be able to, first of all, see what it is that we need to do and actually start doing the work. And I'm quite fortunate that I had somebody that pushed me in that direction, because without them, I wouldn't have realized that there is work that I need to do. Sometimes we have to be put in very uncomfortable situations to be able to see that the situations are not caused by somebody else, but it is caused by ourselves and the neglect that we have created towards ourselves because of the neglect that has been presented to us while we were growing up. So this is the first part of creating coherence between your heart and your brain. And this is probably the biggest bulk of the work that you will have to do to be able to create that coherence. I have a free community where I teach people how to become exemplary flame keepers, somebody who looks after their flame, their soul, through mindful integration of emotions and feelings, to be able to achieve full abundance through their spiritual journeys. If that's something that you're interested in, the link is going to be in the description of this video. I will also include a part 2 of this coherence work that everybody needs to try in the description as well if you want to check it out. And the group itself, we have weekly group meetings there. We have guided meditations, we have daily affirmation guidance, and we have exclusive monthly content there as well, based on the choices that the community makes. I really hope I'll see you there. As I said, the link is going to be underneath this video. Click it, check it out, see what you think, and it's completely free. So join, and I'll speak to you all there. Also, leave a comment. Leave a comment underneath this video. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree with what I said? Do you think emotional integration is very important to be able to gain from spirituality or not? I'm super interested to hear your opinions about the topics that I talk about. Otherwise, this has been ailandas.sulcas from Productively Mindful. I love you all, and I'll speak to y'all very, very soon. Love you loads. Goodbye.